All right, y'all. So I don't know what's going on. Actually, I kind of do, but I don't know for sure. So I can't say that. My mom always said, if you don't know for sure, don't say it. So I won't. But it would not even allow me to continue. Okay, so what ends up happening is I'm going back to reverting back to the story about my trek through the woods. So as I get, kind of within 5, 10 minutes in, which means that it took him a few more minutes to get over because he had to walk across the field to get to where I was. But I'm doing my thing and I'm focused. I have a mission. I'm going to do what I do and get out. And so I'm kind of semi deep in, and you know, as I'm starting that process, maybe I'm 5 minutes in, I hear crunch behind me. So I turn around. When I turn around, um, when I turn around, there is a male. I just see the silhouette of him. And so I'm looking, and then as soon as I see him, I go the opposite direction because I'm just like, no, I'm in the woods. You know what I'm saying? And so he actually follows me, and then he's like, hello, hello, you know, you speak English? He's a white guy. You speak English? And I didn't say anything. And so I pulled the veil over my face because he's trying to make eye contact with me. And then he says, do you live here? Do you live here? And I'm not saying anything because I'm like, this guy has got to know this is creepy. You are a Caucasian male. You followed a female of color into the woods. And she's obviously not interacting with you. But you're continuing. She's obviously not interacting with you. But you're continuing to. I have all kind of weird things going on. But she's obviously not. And a Caucasian male walked by. I've seen him before though. He does jogging, from what I remember around the thing. And because he has on a hoodie, it reminds me of the pink hoodie that the girl that set the fire was part of that fire thing. Except she was heavy set Caucasian. But I think this is a male. But what ends up happening, and I need to start, and this is good because it's giving me alert. So I need to start looking right and left and all the way behind me every few minutes or so. But anyhow, so I'm aware of what's going on. So what ends up happening is, where was I? Okay, the woods. So so I didn't say anything, but I'm getting high alert. But I'm like, if I just sit here and don't say anything, eventually he'll leave because he'll see that I'm not connecting. Then he asks me, he sees I'm not responding, but he's still saying, and then I see that he's not going anywhere. So I set my little sit down thing down and I sit down on top of it. And he's just like, do you speak English? Do you have a light? Do you have a smoke? I left my lighter in the truck. That's what he said. He said he left his lighter in the truck, but then after sitting there a long time, he pulled the lighter out of his pocket. And then on top of that, then he says, you know, you're very pretty. And that's creeped me out. And I jumped up immediately and I ran. Yeah, this is the guy that does the running around the track. I jumped up immediately and I ran. Well, it's 9 o'clock already. I jumped up immediately and I ran around I walked briskly towards the other end of the woods and exited. As I exited, and he saw me, he zoomed out, directly out. So he wasn't out because what he said to me as he was sitting there trying to get me to engage in conversation, what he says to me is, oh, I just want somebody to talk to. But dude, you walk past 20 people, male and female, standing by themselves, and you didn't say a single word. You didn't engage in any conversation with them, right? And then on top of that, it goes from there to, he told me more things later, but that's where he started with that. So that didn't make sense at all. So, you followed a brown female into the woods because you needed someone to talk to. There were people that were there sitting in their vehicles that you could have talked to. There were people walking the track, people sitting in the pavilion. You walked past all of those people to follow me? No. So anyways, and I just got a creepy feeling as this guy walked by too. He's only been out here for the past couple of months, but it's a lot of weird things going on. And it's all going to culminate in this conversation that I'm sharing with you right now. So, back to the pavilion. So fast forward back to present, well, yesterday, which was present day yesterday in the pavilion. So I said to him, like, where are you from? And he says he's from Jacksonville. And I said, oh, he says he's been here 3 days, right? And at this point, he doesn't recognize that I'm possibly recognizing him. So I'm putting two together and I'm looking. I'm like, is that guy? Because the guy, when in the woods, he said, my name is, I'm going to say B Lake, right? And I'm like, I didn't say anything in response. So I asked him, I said, okay. I said, well, what's your name? And he says he's visiting, people down here. And this is the same thing that another vehicle with Ben Hillside's Caucasian said the same thing. That basically he was visiting, but he lived in Valdosta he's living now in Valdosta for 4 years, and they live on the north side. This guy also said he lives on the north side, and he's visiting. So it's weird. But then let me continue on, and then I'll tell the story about the other vehicle later. So then what ends up happening is that, and I said, well, what's your name? And he says, I'm going to make up a name, B. Lake. And I'm like, oh. And I said, I think I recognize you. A few months ago, you followed me into the woods. You're a stalker. You followed me into the woods. And I said, and I was just like, it's really inappropriate, for a male, and I told him I do newsletters for men, mission-oriented, valiant, and equipped. We have to be more responsible about our interactions. It's really inappropriate for a male, especially, knowing social dynamics and different isms that are in place, to follow a female of color into the woods and continue to try to engage with that individual after they've shown you clearly that they do not want to engage. That is a very scary situation. And I said, I actually wrote a newsletter about it, of course, without any identifiable information. And then at that point, he was just like, well, the reason I followed you, you look like a girl that I know. But I said, sir, even if I did look like somebody that doesn't make it okay for you to follow them, into the woods. That's scary. That person, if you knew them, and he didn't call out, he said her name was Miranda. He didn't call out Miranda. All he did was silently follow, and waited a while so there'd be a little bit of distance so it wouldn't be noticeable. Right? So at that point, I'm creeped out. So I jump up and I walk around. And when I jump up to walk around, I check the license plate. It is the same license plate, and it's the same dent in the right driver door, right? So, and this is scary. What I think, and what I told him, and I was like, that's really inappropriate. I said, and not to mention, specifically, but to talk a little bit about race and put race into the issue. I'm not into politics. I'm not into race. I'm just into, enjoying nature and the outdoors and trying to put out good, But I said, there are segments of the population that, especially with, the person in office that's in office, that are seeking out marginalized folks, that are seeking out people of color and, looking for opportunities, at a certain point to perhaps do harm, And when I said this, he kind of tensed up, like, trying to maintain a neutral, but you could see that there was some type of emotion in him. And I said, that's really inappropriate. I can't control what you do or do not do. And, you don't have to, approve or decline what I'm saying. But, because whatever it is that you're doing, I can't control you. I can't make you not do that. I can't change your mindset against that. But I'm letting you know that I am aware that those things do happen. And, in the event that you're not aware, they do. So, the way that you interact with people and what you do, what you did was absolutely inappropriate, And then shortly after that, he gets in his truck and he leaves his truck that was quote unquote broken down. Also, last October, the same kind of situation, I call it SGD. There was a male that, purported, and I believe his truck probably didn't work that well, and he was stalking. And then the fire starters, the arsonists, the teen arsonists that were here last year, I think the same thing. I remember being somewhere and hearing she's probably watching us do this, and they're chopping on my things, And so it's been a while in the thing in process, and I think all of these people are related to, that particular entity, somehow, that business. I don't know for sure, so I can't say that. That's hearsay. I absolutely do not know that for sure. But these individuals haven't always been, probably, like in the last 6, 7 months. And this guy that's running on the track, the last time I was here, in a long spurt, he started popping up too. He wasn't always here. He hasn't been showing up here lately either. The last time that he was here was in July, when again there was a Caucasian vehicle, and I called him shh because that's an identifier that I have for him. Was accosted me. So, and the thing about it is that I don't know the fire starters definitely use the N-word, so that's definitely a hate crime. And then also there's another guy that comes out here occasionally that lives an alternate lifestyle as well. And he told me how he was at the park. This is during the broad daylight, and a little Caucasian girl started to call him the N-word, and her mom stopped him. So there is that type of dynamic going on around here. And I've seen it at the other park. There's a tennis guy or whatever, and I saw it, but this was like a couple of years ago, where the guys were sitting and talking, and they were saying, oh, if that was my daughter, whatever, I would hang somebody. They were using that type of language as I was watching him teaching a tennis class, and I reported it to whoever was in the booth. So, there are things to be aware of. When I was on the net a lot, you know, there were people, and I was in rooms, and my rooms don't purport, my screen names don't purport pro any race or anything. I'm just going through, and this is on Kick, I'm just shifting through different live streams. And this guy was saying again how, they have a due date and this, that, and the other. So there are things that are going on and happening, that we don't know about directly. And the thing about it was, again, a couple that came out, so that was the same guy. And so I told him, I said, I don't know if you're stalking me again or you just happen to be here, but, and he says, yeah, he remembered. But then the stories he told didn't match up. Just like the story he told about, how asking me for a lighter, but he had a lighter. Story he told about, needing someone to talk to, but he don't walk past all these people into the woods, a female. And then the story he told about, just so many different stories about how, he thought I looked like a girl named Miranda that he knew, but he didn't call out for Miranda. He walked right past me. So that's not true, you know. So definitely be on the lookout. And I got to say, what's scary to me is that amongst people of color, there's not even that. The guy that came out, with his girl yesterday, he says to me, oh, who burned your stuff down? And laugh. And I didn't say nothing because I didn't want to provide any additional information. But, I don't know if, hate crimes and things like that are important to him. And maybe he doesn't care because a lot of, like I said, I go to churches and they don't care. And speaking of which, like I said about, my channel and about having a phone number and how my videos may pop up just because somebody has my phone number. I got a text from the pastor of the church, like I said, that, my most recent membership is at. And he never does. So I'm thinking probably what happens or hasn't, and there's a whole story behind that, and I'll share that when I can. Probably what happened is that my video popped up. And so, he's doing protection. One of the things that I had was part of my ministry was the Be Intentional ministry, which is I love you with the love of Christ. Being intentional, because a lot of times when you marginalize people are saying take care, be safe, but be intentional. Either that God has got it covered, or you are going to ask, what are 3 things you want to need that can help you, be more in care or be more safe, and they didn't like that. And I told him, and this is how I joined that church, I told him when I went there, I was so impressed. And again, like I said, people for moments, but the video that I had about moments was not directed towards that individual. The individual was the Tampa Dread individual that I was talking about initially, and then it moved on to other people that have helped out. But the reason that I joined that church was because, should I get into this? Probably shouldn't. I don't know. Was because many churches, I visited every church in Valdosta, in an attempt to have the Christian Connection program that I have promoted. And basically it's an outreach of the community to the churches. There's churches on every corner, but there's nothing being done. The communities around are still failing. Crime is happening on their property, you know what I'm saying, or near their property. They see people walk past, and even with me, there's a church right across the street. There's 5 or 6 churches around here. All of them I have a story for. But the way that this coincides with my most recent membership is that, there was a church, directly across. And what happens, what I'm realizing is that when they see people, this is a whole different thing. I'm not going into that. I was just sharing and updating on yesterday. That's what happened yesterday. So I kept it sacred. I kept it kept it still, just sharing with you some of the things that, situations that happen when people, when you're, in a situation that's a little untraditional, and what my progress is, again, from marginalization through metamorphosis to momentum. Finalizing to be a mogul that is able to overcome systemic barriers and social dynamics. And these are things that you saw. You're trying to do good, and then you're trying to, you know, both sides. Because initially, when I first had my first organization, was Passion Brown, and it purported basically it doesn't matter your socioeconomic class. You could be rich and still need love. You need love and support. You might be isolated because you're rich or doing well. And it doesn't matter about your socioeconomic class, or you could have absolutely nothing but still need love, support, and encouragement. And that's what it's about: agape love, support, and encouragement. And I'm gonna leave that there for now. I need to charge my device, go ahead and make my sign for today, and then when I come back next time, I'll share a little bit more about my missions. But give me your feedback. And again, all of this is for educational, documentary, scientific, and artistic purposes only. I love you with the love of Christ. And we'll get into churches another time. That's a whole different thing. I love you. Have a great day.